You are listening to Down Home, Episode 6. This week we have a conversation with Ena Maxim about her Scotian roots and systemic racism in education. Welcome to Down Home, the Nova Scotian experience from two black men. We have another special guest this week, Ena Maxim. I've known Ena for a long time, actually. And just before you go into that, Ena, I remember walking into my kid's school, and first thing you said to me, you looked me up and down and said, "I understand you're Scotian." So Ena, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, you gotta love that meet and greet. That's totally down home.
Mm-hmm.
So my name is Ena Maxim, and I know Derek Wise through the school that I worked with. My connection with Nova Scotia was I was born there. I was born in Windsor, and the county is Annapolis Valley, so I'm really a valley girl. And my mother was from Nova Scotia. She was from Falmouth, and she did something kind of different. So people will say, Maxim, there's no Scotians in Maxim. Like, we don't know the family, because my mother married a Cuban. And that was a big thing back then, because everybody will remember my mother as Bernadine Goler, and they'll say, oh yeah, she married that Cuban. So that's my mom's, she's notorious. Just want to maintain status quo with your show. I'm wearing I don't know if you can see it. Okay.
Whoa.
Cool.
Yeah, represent.
And then for my drinking, out of my drinking cup, I am drinking from there we go.
United Baptist Church, Africville, Nova Scotia.
Nice.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, the church roots run deep in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go there on that one. But so, and it was interesting because I left Nova Scotia and I was 3 months old, which was a very interesting situation because my grandmother was supposed to deliver me. She was a midwife down home because, everybody can't get to the hospital, but she died. So my mom ended up going to Windsor, and then there was conflict because my father being Afro-Cuban and me being so fair-skinned, the nurse was saying, "This is not your child." And my father was like, "Yes, it is. She got my last name." So next minute, to prevent me from being part of the 60 scoop, and I say that because my mom's roots are Black and Indigenous, I was shipped off 3 months old to Newark, New Jersey.
Wow.
Yeah. And there I was educated for 12 years. And because Newark was having a lot of race riots, and, civil rights movement, we returned to Canada. My brother, myself, my mom, but my dad being, had his own business, he stayed back home in Jersey. So this is where, I want to talk about, I know you mentioned to me about systemic racism. It's interesting how things are when you're in Canada because it's subtle.
It's very subtle.
And in the United States, it's up close and personal. It's in your face because they're going to tell you like it is. Whereas in Canada, they do it politely.
Mm-hmm.
And you walk away and wait, hold on here, when I look at my roots and my family roots, like my grandfather, Frank Herbert Goler, he was a smart businessman, but he was illiterate and he could only write his name, but he owned an apple orchard and he gave a gentleman named Mr. Pezant rite of passage through his property to bring his lumber. And that was a big deal back then because that was a Black man with Indigenous roots also giving permission of a white man to come on his property.
Wow.
So that was huge. And then you have my grandfather was asked to be one of the jurors on a murder case.
That's unusual.
And he was a Black man.
Wow.
So, and I share these stories with you because my grandfather told me, because a lot of our history is oral history, because either they don't know how to read or write, because they've all went out and work on the farm or had to get a job, and there's always storytelling, And I remember my grandfather telling me that my great-grandfather, and along with my uncle, Clarence Delbert Gray, is the uncle of Clyde Gray.
Yeah.
His father and my great-grandfather, they call it Gray Mountain. Really, it's not a mountain, it's a hill. It was a place where the runaway slaves from the United States sought safety and passage.
Okay.
So they would go through the Underground Railroad, get to Nova Scotia, and then as long as you have a piece of property, you had squatters' rights, then you were free.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I said, it was never a mountain, it's a hill. But, this is the history that we carry, but we don't get a chance to share.
Yeah.
Very, very true.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. That's great. So you went to Jersey at the age of 3.
3 months old.
3 months old. So your early memories are American, basically, right?
No, because my mom had strong Scotian roots.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because, that's how we identify each other as Scotian, because back in the day, if you were Black, Indigenous, or Black, you would never say you're from Nova Scotia. It's always, you Scotian? I'm Scotian. And it's kind of like just kept on the down low. So every year up until my grandfather passed away, I was leaving New Jersey, the city, and living in where my mom was born, the house that my grandfather built in Falmouth, Nova Scotia. And if you don't know Falmouth, that is 45 miles outside of Halifax, and it is the midpoint of the equator.
Yeah.
It's famous.
Yeah.
So you spent every summer there then?
Oh, yes. And talk about your cultural shock, because, you talk about indoor plumbing in New Jersey. Then you come to Nova Scotia. You're going into the forest, into the rural area. You got your outhouse. You got your cast iron tub.
Yeah.
And you have your kitchen floors that are dirt floors.
Dirt. Yeah.
Dirt floors. And you have your wooden stove.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And probably a well too, right? To go get your water.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my father built a cement lid for my grandfather's well. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's it. So what brought you to Toronto?
Well, my aunt was here. She moved from Nova Scotia. And in New Jersey, like I said, there was a lot of race riots, and my brother's friends were being recruited to gangs and stuff like this, division. And it was just, it wasn't good. It wasn't good at all. And so Dad said, I've established my clientele. I'm going to stay here as a Black Cuban man. He worked up a clientele, and his business was lucrative. We own our own house in Jersey. So, we were doing pretty good. And my mom and my brother and I went to visit my aunt in Toronto, and Mom liked it. And she said, Dad had bought a house in California. Mom said, I want to be above ground, not underground. Where my people. So we went back to Canada and we returned. And this is where my first encounter of, that systemic racism. Mm-hmm. So my Canadian returning, I'm born Canadian, my brother's American. And then you have the immigration officer telling my mother, you can come, the daughter can come, but your son can't come. And we're like, what? And he said, he's going to be deported. So this is where my mom, my mom was a very quiet and passive woman. She really didn't rock the boat with any form of authoritarian. It was like not her. And I watched her go into survival mode. And she said, down home, how your mother gave you that look? I am talking it's different how we raise our children, that we want to hear your opinion. We want to know what you're thinking. That day, children should be seen and not heard. So Mom started telling the man, you want to deport him? Go ahead and deport him. I don't know where his father is. You go find him. And then my brother and I looked at each other like, what? And then we look at Mom, look at the man, and look at each other. In our minds, we're like, well, we know where Dad is. He's back in our house, So it was quite interesting how Mom, she was very angry because as a returning Canadian, she did not have the perks as a immigrant, didn't have the housing, did not have welfare rate set up, it was like, you're on your own, good luck.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
That was our first time I watched my mother, who's kind of like a chill, laid back woman. The second time is when I was going to the education system. Now, I need to point out, I am a TDSB employee, and I'm bound by their code and ethics as an employee that I cannot speak about systemic racism as an employee. However, and I say I can talk about my experience as a person attending the TDSB, and I could talk about my children experience. So on that note, moving forward, I went to Lord Dufferin School. And to this day, Lord Dufferin has a mural for their 100th, I think, 100 or 200th anniversary. And I made sure my little brown face was up on that mural. Even though my other friends of color, they were like, I can't be, I said, oh no, I want to make sure they know there were brown people in the school too, you know, which changed because we were the minorities, but now Lord Dufferin is very, very diverse. So I remember Mom going and talk to this principal. Again, my mother, when it came to authority, she would just stay silent. And like she said to me, when I came to Canada, she turned to me and said, Ena, listen, don't rock the boat, okay? Just try to get along. Don't rock the boat. And I'm looking at her like, what do you mean, Mom? Just, you know, because I grew up, like I said, with the Americans, with that, that constitution that everybody, freedom of speech. And I was actually doing that as a young, I would call them out. And so the principal noticed that I was, being educated from a foreign institution, even though it's the States. And that year, my friends that I met from Trinidad and Jamaica, everybody got put back.
Oh, really?
They got put. Yes. If you came from Jamaica, with, I don't know, like Nova Scotia, Jamaica, like West Indian education, they're tough. You talk to any of your friends, you better know your stuff. Nova Scotia, my mother nearly failed kindergarten because you had to know how to count to 20 and write your name.
Yeah.
So, they don't mess around. So they said, because I came from the United States, I was going to be held back a grade. Well, this is where my mother, okay, one of the very few moments that she stepped forward and said, I don't think so. She goes, she has a straight grade A student from grade 1. She was supposed to be skipped from grade 6 to grade 8. And here's the documentation. And you want to put her back? So they were going back and forth. And finally, she said, fine, don't skip her, but you're not putting her back. And she managed to get me to put in grade 7, which I actually was applicable to my age. So fine. Then it came about learning French. And oh my gosh. So they said, well, she needs to be bilingual. She needs to learn French. And this is from my dad's family. Pero yo soy canadiense. Y yo entiendo español muy bien. And so my mom was like, she's already bilingual. And, I passed my French. Listen to this. Her name was Madame Elizabeth Beer, who was the director for Canadian Living magazine.
Oh, wow.
Was my teacher. Realized as I'm trying to answer the questions, and she's answering me in French, I'm answering her in Spanish, writing it on the board in Spanish, and she says, Ena, by chance, do you speak another language? I said, oh yeah, I speak Spanish. So then she pulls me aside and said, here's the deal. I'll pass you, but you got to promise me you're never going to take French. I said, done. And I ended up passing. I ran into her years later. I was a parent, and I said, Madame Bear, how are you? She's good. She goes, Ena, you were one of the students I remember well. And I said, yeah, and I kept my promise. I never took French. Didn't take it in high school. Didn't take it in university. So, I just want to let you know, I'm a woman of my word.
Très bien.
Oh, my only line, excusez-moi, mademoiselle, c'est un accident. I figured that, that line would get me out of trouble. Like it was an accident and I'm sorry. But I have to tell you though, I felt the systemic racism even in middle school. And I saw it, not just from my mom's lens, but from my own personal experience. And I remember, how back in the days, you're not allowed to chew gum in school. So I was chewing gum, and it was my first week at Lord Dufferin. And I remember I'm trying to hold this gum in my mouth because I am not throwing it away. I know it was hubba bubba, whatever, but I was not giving up the gum. And I started reading, and this white teacher, my teacher, Miss Fouché, looked at me, and because you get funding, you know, when you put children into special programs, the board gets funding. So they will streamline you, you know, ESL funding. Oh, you know, I remember my friend once told me she was from Jamaica and they spoke English, and she said, yeah, they tried to put me in an ESL class. And I was like, I said, what language do you guys speak? Like, I know you speak English. So Miss Fouché walks me down to this room to do a reading test. Now I got this gum in my mouth, and I'm like, all right, you know, because I was very slow in reading with her and in class. So she just looks at me, you know, total stereotype, visible minority, we're going to give, you know. And as I'm walking down, she brings me to this teacher. I look up, it's a black teacher. It's a black teacher that, and I know black teachers from Jersey. Those ones you don't mess with. You go in, you do what they say, because you really don't want to cross them. I looked at her, and I did this one big gulp, and the gum was gone. So she turns around, and she gives me this book, and she says, okay, young lady, because she had a bit of a West Indian accent. She says, I want you to read this book and keep reading until you get to a word that you don't know how to read, or you don't understand, or you don't know how to pronounce it. I said, okay. I got through 3/4 of the book, and I was going to finish the book, and she says, enough. Stand up. I stand up like a soldier. I'm marching with her. She goes, follow me, and I'm walking back. So she gets into my homeroom, my classroom, meets the white teacher, Miss Fouché, and she turns to her and says, don't waste my time. And sends me on back and said, have a seat.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, we had our parents on, or our mothers on, and my mother used to really have issues with some of the teachers because, you know, I'm 3 years old or whatever, and they're asking you to color in whatever, the coloring book. And I always used to color the people brown. And the teachers used to say, hey, you know, we don't want him to feel different or what. And my mother said, he's different, but that's okay. Like, it's all right. Have you, you know, with your own kids and their experiences, have you had any instances where you've had to point out that my kids are black, it's okay for them to identify as being black?
Oh, well, this is where I thought, let's even take a step further. My children know me. And in fact, my daughter Eden shared with her professor this year about what I used to make them do. So I used to say to them, school's like a job. Okay, you're not there to make friends. You're not there to socialize. Get the job done. You got enough family, you know, because, you know, you're tight with your cousin, you're tight with your siblings. That's what you're there for. You're there to learn. And when it came to Black History Month, my kids will tell you used to dread Black History Month. And the reason why they dread it wasn't, you know, in the schools, it's like, you know, that's concentration that you get for 30 days, or well, if it's in February. So it's like 28 days of concentration of Black history. And then that concentration is supposed to last you for the other 11 months. So you got to kind of like spread it out. So my kids would say, oh no, here comes Black History Month. I said, all right, this is what we're going to do. And when they knew, all right, each one of them had to do an independent project at home that I assigned them. And they would have to do the project. Then I would talk to the teacher and say, and now they're going to present and educate you people.
Oh, wow.
So I give you an example. My daughter Jade did the Underground Railroad, and she did it out of Lego and Oreo cookie crumbs. And she talked about it and about the key features and who was involved, et cetera, et cetera. Then my daughter Eden, she dressed up because really not with Canada, but one of the American girls that had the opportunity to go for school, and she wore the outfit and she talked about her experience because we read the book. Now, my son Maxim, he because I figure, okay, you know what? You like doing all these presentations. I'm gonna make you do two. One, we made fried dumplings, like the West Indian fried dumplings.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about how it was the food that the slaves would carry with them on a day's work. So they would be made in the morning and everybody wrapped it up in a tissue and they carried it on their person. All the kids in his class carried it. And at 3 o'clock, it was or 2:30 was snack time. Everybody would pull out their fried dumpling and ate it. So they were doing exactly what the slaves would do with the food.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the other one I made him do was because at one point his school was like focusing on Americans, which I don't mind. And I understand Canada always looks up to the United States as big brother, but we have our own people that have history and have been very successful and have, the pillars of our path, our road. And I remember made my son do this one particular American, and not Martin Luther King or Malcolm X. He did Bayard Rustin. And everybody was like, okay, this kid's talking about Bayard Rustin, who was a gay Black man who had the faith of something like a Mennonite. And everybody was like, okay, this is interesting. And then Maxim said, you may not know him, but he was there when Martin Luther King gave his speech, and you could see him in the background mouthing it. And the reason why you can see him mouthing it, because that is the man that wrote the speech.
Oh, wow.
Supposed to deliver that speech, but they pulled him back because he got caught in the park, in a van, with another man, and they said, you're not going to represent,
Wow.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah. And my kids will say, yeah. And our mother made sure Black History Month that we were all educators.
Yeah, it's true.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's with Black families, it's a lifelong education, and just like going back to the oral history of how those stories were taught. And I can remember my grandfather telling me stories, just about his life and everything, and that's really something great that is passed along to us, so we can pass on to our children. Yeah, it's great.
I remember my grandfather telling me that his father was born on a boat. And I'm like, as I'm playing on the floor in Nova Scotia, I'm like, because I was that child that was inquisitive. I was that child that would say, well, why do we have to do that? Or how is this way? I said, well, how did this happen? He explained to me that his mother and his father were slaves in the Nazatico, Virginia plantation.
Wow.
And they were running away. And what happened was my great-great-grandmother was Syrian. So she was Jewish. And then his father was Cherokee. So they're running to Nova Scotia. And what they did was their slave master's last name was Monday. And they basically had that. So when they got to Nova Scotia, because, as again, runaway slaves, people would have their master's names, not thinking I should change it because they could see. They changed it to Goler, which is an old Jewish name that my grandmother, who was Jewish, knew of back in her country in Syria. So again, it's interesting, how people's names tells a story.
Yeah, very
Definitely.
much so.
Yeah. Well, Jason's last name is Jones. So Jones must have been the largest plantation owner in all of the northern. Because
yeah,
so many Jones.
That's why everyone's trying to keep up with the Joneses. You know what I mean? But okay, I do want to ask the question about from your viewpoint, what is the systemic education like for the Black kids in the school board?
Well, I want to touch base on one thing that a colleague once said to me, and I had to explain to her why we have the Afrocentric school, why we have the Wandering Spirit school. And her comment was, well, when you do that, you are segregating from the rest of us. Isn't that the whole idea that we all be together and we learn together? And I said, well, yes, this is true. However, there are certain schools that like to give the opportunity to have that concentration and not just have it 1 month out of, 12 months, but to learn every day about history. I think it's important, we need to have that, and we need to not know that, we have great people. I remember someone told me, who was West Indian, saying Black Canadians had no history. And I said, no, we have history, but we're not as aggressive of sharing it. We're very polite. You ask us, we'll tell you, but we're not going to be out there advertising, with the TDSB. I can't speak as an employee, but I've seen children. I see them, streamlining that, try to get everybody, that little extra funding. I see, and kudos to the teachers that try, that are not Indigenous, that are not Black, but they can't be that voice. They can't tell that story with the connection to saying, like I'm telling you, I could talk about the Black history and say, oh yes, and my grandfather has done this. My grandfather has contributed to the Black, the Black organization, It is challenging because, when I was going to school, and my children are the same now that they're 20, 23, and 26, they talk about it. Like, all you hear is the genocide of the Indigenous people and the Black people with slavery. And, and so how some came up, the Loyalists, the Maroons, and you're like, okay, but they had to do some good, okay? Yeah. It wasn't always bad. And just to have that negative connotation behind it, it doesn't give children self-pride. It doesn't give children, self-awareness, the confident to put up your hand, everything. Just, you sit back because it's still European based.
Yeah, very much so.
Still there. So when they say to you, yeah, we're talking about this, it's like, why are we talking about Martin Luther King? Like, why aren't we talking like Viola Desmond or Laura Howe, or Buddy Day? Like,
I want to switch gears actually, because before we came on, you had mentioned a couple of topics that you wanted to talk about, and one hadn't even crossed my mind, but it does sound quite important, and that is the experience of Black women and when you're having to go through the medical community, and some of the misconceptions and some of the things that go on there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, for sure. I'm like, I would say I'm a product of it. I've ended up with stage 3 advanced breast cancer. And then it came back again because he didn't listen to me. And, I think God puts me on this earth to remind them of their mistakes. And I never let them forget. Every time, you look familiar. I go, sure, I'm the woman you misdiagnosed. Like, but it's out there and it's serious because it's not just Black women. I always include our sisters and brothers that are Indigenous because we all fall under that same umbrella that we're coming forward. We're saying we're not well. We're not well. And, it's how the medical field is treating us. They're very dismissive with our concerns. They are your GP is the gatekeeper to get a referral to go on to get more tests. But if they feel that you're fine and they don't want to push you forward and give you that referral, you're stuck.
Wow. And
you can't even go to another doctor because then you get labeled as the problematic patient. And it's awful. The one good thing is I sat on a committee from Women's College Hospital, and there were other breast cancer survivors, and we talked about our experience. And now women that are 50 and over do not have to get that referral to get a mammogram to go to their doctor. If they said, no, I don't think so, I think it's all in your head, and move forward. You can walk in and just bring your health card and get tested. I remember my cousin Wendy Gray, who was having a C-section, and they gave her this anesthetic, and she said to the doctor, I can feel every stitch that you're cutting. And he goes, oh, no, it's all psychosomatic. Like, it's all in your head. Just no, I'm telling you. And as she's on the table delivering her first child, she can feel the incisions. She can feel them sewing until after you know, he was so nonchalant, the doctor. Oh yeah, I realized the anesthesiologist said, yeah, you could have felt it. Like so dismissive,
Mm.
so dismissive, you know.
Wow.
Our healthcare, how they perceive Black people. You know, only time they want you is when they want a guinea pig. And my mother was a clear example. When she died of breast cancer, she was part of a study for visible minorities that were bringing in the mammogram machine to Toronto. Now, here's the thing. They really weren't going to use it on us, but they had to use our community to say, but we want it for everybody, and we're going to be, you know, inclusive. And, you know, they found something with my mom and left it for a few more years. And then finally it surfaced because she hit her breast, and a lump came, a mass, when she just had a mammogram 3 months before that, and they found out she had cancer, you know. And it was interesting because had they been proactive with her health and a bit more aggressive and, you know, thinking of this person, not of the color of her skin, I think she may have been here today.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. You're making me question some of my own, because I've had some major surgeries on joints, and you know, you're making me question some of the interactions that I had with some of these doctors.
Well, here's one I can tell you. At one point, they did a study, and they were like, money. It's money business, and they had a high ratio of Black women getting hysterectomies.
Really?
And yes, and my friend was one of them, and it was like going through the, you know, the turnstile, like the revolving door. They were bringing them in, send them out, bring them in, send them out, and really some of them didn't. But it's hard because, you know, it's very difficult to sue a doctor, very difficult to get other people to come forward and admit they did wrong or witness they did wrong. You know, I was fortunate that my cousin Wendy went with me, and I remember the doctor told me to go home, I'm fine. And I said, no, but the student doctor down the hall wants to talk to me. And I remember there was a white lady, she was pregnant. And I turned to her and I said, they're going to ask you about this meeting between him and I, because at one point we were arguing. And I thought he was going to call security, because that's the only way I was like, in order to, you know, to get that test. And so I had a choice. When I left the examining room, I could go to the right and take the door and go home, or I would go to the left. And I said to myself, I know I have breast cancer, and he's not listening, because it's the same like my mom. And my mom taught me, and she showed me. Mm-hmm. And I went down and took the left turn, and the woman did a biopsy underneath my arm and took a sample and came back and said I was stage 3 advanced. Now, I thank that doctor today. She is a woman of color. She is Middle Eastern. And I ran into her a few years ago, and it was amazing. And I thanked her. I said, you saved my life, because in 6 months I would have been dead. I was just on the cusp of stage 4, which they don't even want to help you. And I shouldn't say they don't want to help you, but your options are limited. And I asked her, I said, why did you listen to me when the other doctor in examining me wouldn't? She said, it was a story that you told me about your mother and how she acquired breast cancer. And I was like floored. And she said, there was probability that you know your body best. And the doctor that my mother had, Dr. Trudeau, who went on to Sunnybrook, I was 33 years old, pregnant with my second child, knowing that this is the 3rd round with my mom with breast cancer, and she may not make it. And I said to the doctor, what do I do not to end up like my mother? And she said, just tell your story. They'll know what to do. I told my story, and nobody listened.
Wow. That's, you know,
wow.
I think this is why these conversations are quite important. Like, especially for our community, because a lot of our community we especially in Nova Scotia, like you said, we grow up and we're taught not to make waves, and we're told to get along, right? I think this conversation, especially, you know, conversations that we're having here, is important to actually question and ask questions and stand up for yourself and whatnot.
Very much so.
Yeah, this has been amazing. Ena, you're amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Jay Jones, you want to take us out?
Yes, thank you so much for sharing your story and standing up for your rights and teaching the kids to stand up for their rights as well. It's an important thing, and we can only learn from our elders, and things like this, bringing light to situations that no one thinks about in an everyday kind of way, is really important. And that's why we started this podcast, and we're really glad that you could be a part of it. And I'm so proud and happy that you got some Nova Scotian roots too, because we're strong people.
I wanted to share with you one thing, and I want to stress this too. It's something about the kids, and that is you doctors also have this perception of children, like more Black children can tolerate more pain. So they would like, oh, well, you don't really need that, or, and I say this because when my son broke his wrist, nobody listened to him. He made a makeshift, sweater. And the next minute, teachers poking at it, say, oh, does that hurt? Like, it's a broken wrist.
Wow.
And then, he went to another teacher, and then the other teacher was disciplining him because he couldn't write, and the principal at the end was looking at me, and I'm like, he's got a broken wrist. And then the other thing I want to add, sorry, Jay, just with this patient with the hospitals, as a Black mother going into the hospital with your child who broke his wrist at 10:30, but you don't find out, and then you take him at the hospital at 2:30, they're looking at you and ready to call CAS on you, like, oh, this is negligent. Your child has a broken wrist, and you're just bringing him down. What were you doing? And I said,
my God.
And I said to them, well, first of all, I was at a doctor's appointment, but when I found out, I went over, and just to let you know, it was the school. And if you want to call CS to sit on me, on the school, by all means, I will be there. Never happened.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah,
well,
lessons to learn, man.
For sure. And the lessons keep on coming too. The school of life,
Guys.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for listening to another episode of Down Home, the Nova Scotia experience by two Black men. I'm Jay Jones, and that's Derek Wise. And thanks for listening. And like I said, thanks for sharing your story.
Anyway, gentlemen, I look forward to this and hearing everybody else. I think the idea of wearing something Scotian, or I think that's really cool. And I found when I was listening to Jason's story, it was very interesting. It was very connecting and engaging. Because we all, as parents, we have this thing, we can tune out people, just automatic. But I was like, wow, this is good. This is good.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Signing off. Thank you.
Right.
The neighborhood.
All right.
Take care.
Ya.
Take care of yourself. Thanks
Bye.
again.
You have been listening to Down Home. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. The song Breaking New Ground from The Breakdown.
On a high plateau, from the one down below to the future of the funk, getting lost in the flow.